This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglan.
We talk little on this show about taxes, and that's odd because taxes do apply to wildlife conservation. Federal excise taxes mostly, but in Kentucky, your state taxes don't pay for fish and wildlife programs. Education, highways, public protection, yes indeed. But fish and wildlife, no, with one exception. And even it's an option. We'll explain next on Kentucky Afield Radio.
Hunting elk in Kentucky is a dream come true for many, and I want to add my name to that list.
And I want to add mine.
If you want to add yours,
the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife website is Elk Central. The Pick 4 option lets you put your name in the hat for cow, bull, archery, or firearm.
Plus youth tags.
The deadline is midnight, April 30th.
This could be my year.
And it could be yours.
Register for incredible Kentucky elk hunting at fw.ky.gov.
Boys, we're in trouble.
A true story.
And it sunk right out from under us.
Perfect for duck hunting, but not for a swim in the middle of a river.
My hands were so cold in a matter of seconds that I couldn't pop the clip on my waders to get them off.
There's no time to react when your world just sinks out from under you.
3 hunters, 2 survivors, 1 reason.
Your life jacket's got your back.
Your Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife reminds you your life jacket's got your back, and the backing of sportsmen on winter water everywhere. Welcome to Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. Have you spent your tax return yet? Do you have plans for it at least? Will you even receive a refund this year? And in the event that you do get a refund, that's what this show is about today. We go inside outdoors to talk about the Nature and Wildlife Fund. It's what we call a tax checkoff. You probably heard a public service announcement right here on this show for it anyway. So you're familiar with the name. 2 more names that you'll become more familiar with as the hour goes on are Zeb Weese, the Executive Director of the Kentucky State Nature Preserves Commission, and Sunni Carr, who leads the Kentucky Wildlife Diversity Program for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. Zeb, Sunni, I'm glad you're here.
Thanks for having us, Charlie.
Tax time again already.
Yep.
That's why we're here to talk about the Nature and Wildlife Fund. At the very end of the tax form, if you're filing your individual Kentucky tax form, you will come across a few things. There's a lot of these. They call them tax checkoffs. The Nature and Wildlife Fund, which we're talking about today, is the first one listed. There's the Child Victims Trust Fund, the Veterans Program, the Breast Cancer Research and Education Trust Fund, the Farms to Food Banks Trust Fund, Local History, Special Olympics, Pediatric Cancer Research, and the Rape Crisis Center Trust Fund. They're all well and good, and we want to talk about the Nature and Wildlife Fund today. Who best between the 2 of you can talk about what that fund does?
The Tax Checkoff Fund has been able to provide funding to both the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources and the Kentucky State Nature Preserves Commission to help fund programs and positions to make sure that our natural resources in the state are well cared for, and they allow us to go out and look at fish and wildlife and plant communities and see how those are doing. And this is something that belongs to all the Commonwealth, so we're proud to be a part of the program.
Did you say that this fund funds a position for the Nature Preserves Commission? Does it go further than that?
One thing I'll point out, you listed that list of tax checkoffs, and again, like you said, they're all great, worthy causes. We would like to see more folks check off any of them, including ours. Now that we've gone to more online tax preparers and whatnot, it has gone down over the years, the number of people that check off these boxes. I think it's probably a function of that, people typing away on their keyboard instead of writing with a pen.
Yeah.
At one point, it did fund 2 entire positions, actually, at the Nature Preserves Commission that mostly did habitat work and trail work, and now that's down to not quite 1 position.
Sunni, for the Kentucky Wildlife Diversity Program, where does this money help you?
A lot of our work depends on federal grants that we compete for or are eligible for within the Commonwealth, and we use that money that we get from the tax checkoff fund, and it gets multiplied many times. For example, the tax checkoff money, that 25% matches 75% of a federal grant. So we can take $25 and translate that into a $100 value for the state. And so we use those monies to go out and sample for things like the eastern hellbender. We are now doing a lot of monarch work for the state and are very concerned about pollinators and the habitat needed there. So your $25 donation can be turned into a total of $100 when that is used as a matching fund to some grant sources. And to be eligible for the grant sources, we have to come up with the match. So that's another really important tool. So you can take and turn that $5 or $10 donation into something much larger as well.
And for this year is going towards a federal project that Nature Preserves Commission and Fish and Wildlife are working on together for grassland habitat, rare species management, monarch management on some of our WMAs and natural areas, nature preserves. So
WMA Wildlife Management Area.
Right.
And you mentioned grasslands. This would apply to both your shops. That's one of those habitats in Kentucky. Yeah, we have it, but you might more quickly call it a hayfield. It's not grassland as we knew it hundreds of years ago, and that the species still wish were here.
So you're right, Charlie. In Kentucky, we traditionally had quite a large, expansive prairie, not just, quote, grassland, but actual prairies in Kentucky, and a lot of folks don't realize that, because that is one of the most endangered types that we have out there. And those were very rich and diverse, and they had things like cytosgramma and big blue stem and little blue stem and Indian grass, very tall grasses. Some were short. There were transition areas into rocky areas called glades, and there are all these very unique plants and animals and insects that live in those. And you know, young people today, they drive by, and your point about they see a, quote, grassland, well, they're basically looking at a hayfield, and that's not a grassland.
Right.
That's a managed plot of ground that we use. You know, it's usually got very low plant diversity, and when those are kept mowed very short, those are kind of biological deserts. There's not much that can live in there or nest in there. A lot of times we don't want any other plant species in there because it impedes the haying process, or it's a concern to farmers. And so, you know, they work hard to keep those fields, quote, clean, but from a wildlife perspective, they don't offer much value.
One way to look at it is if you see a hay field that's real grown up and shaggy during the summertime, just let it go, full of blackberries and whatever. It does provide habitat for critters better than if it's hayed or mowed short in the summertime. One notch up from that would be a planted grassland where native plant species, native grasses to Kentucky and flowers have been seeded in. And then probably the top, I guess, more natural would be our natural remnant grasslands where no planting has been done. They're what was kind of left over from the pioneer era, and we have very little of that left. Out of the tens of millions of acres we used to have, we have a few hundred acres left. So our focus at the Nature Preserves Commission is trying to find those remnant grasslands, the ones that are still there, and maintain them. Managing planting grasslands and planting native species are the next best thing, and that's a big focus, I think, for a lot of agencies right now. And just letting stuff grow up and get shaggy is really beneficial to critters and to plants more than most people realize, as far as keeping your fences, letting them grow up a little bit and just being a little shaggier.
It looks like you're a bad neighbor if you do that, you know. If you want your lawn to look beautiful, you mow it every week. If you want your property, you will keep it almost look like a golf course or a soccer field, and that's not good for wildlife, is it? But when you talk about just letting it grow up and get shaggy, that's the honeymoon suite at the Hilton for a lot of critters, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be, Charlie, and we do have a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves to be good neighbors and so forth, and something I've found that works well is I'm right in the middle of bluegrass country, in the middle of horse farms, and they're very manicured, and I'm sure they look at me and think, what is that lady next door doing? But to give a feeling of some order to that, what they see as a kind of a messy or unkept area is I keep a border mowed around some fields, and then I'd rather give up just a little bit to gain a lot. And the response that I've seen on my own personal place in the last few years it's pretty phenomenal. We've got rabbits all over the place. I've got milkweed up. I've got monarchs using it. Lots of pollinators. When you walk through it, it buzzes. I mean, it's alive.
Pollinators.
And,
describe what those are.
Those are all types of different insects. They can be bees. They can be wasps. They can be butterflies. They can be beetles. There's a whole variety of insects that move around from plant to plant spreading pollen. They help increase the yields in your farms, in your crop fields, in your gardens. Everybody usually thinks of honeybees, and those are a major pollinator, but they're not native to the United States, but they do serve an important function. But we have a lot of native pollinators. So these are the bees and the insects you see flying around, spreading all that pollen to make some good fruits and flowers and berries.
And we like to focus, remind folks that these pollinators are important to folks that like nature, but they're also important to our farmers and our agricultural industry. The more pollinators we have out there doing their job, the better it is for all of us.
The Nature and Wildlife Fund tax checkoff. You'll see it as you calculate your Kentucky personal income tax form. That's the topic this hour. More after the break. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We're back on Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. And one thing that makes my job easy from time to time is I get to interview friends of mine. Sunni Carr, I have known forever and a day. Zeb Weese was once a conservation educator back in the 90s. He would visit schools and teach kids about wildlife. Do you remember Mr. Weese? He's still in that business, sort of. He's moved up the ladder somewhat. And Zeb, talk about your new role now with the State Nature Preserves Commission.
Well, I'm the director of the State Nature Preserves Commission, which is an agency in our Energy and Environment Cabinet. We have a couple different roles. One of our roles is we try to inventory the state's natural areas. And what that means is we look for the most natural areas left in the state of Kentucky with native plants, native animals, habitats that have not been altered by people. And then the second thing we do is we manage some of those lands for the public, hike and trails, and things like that. We work very closely with Fish and Wildlife in some of these issues. We work very closely with the nature license plate folks, the Heritage Land Conservation Fund, to provide access to some of these natural areas that we manage as well.
So Zeb's Habitat is going to help your animals, right, Sunni? So you all have to work together.
And, if you look at what makes good habitat for prairie or grassland birds or prairie and grassland native plants, that's the same place you're going to find quail. That's the same. There's a lot of overlap with sportsmen and what they're interested in, and then with nature folks that might be not into that, might be bird watchers, might be photographers. There's a tremendous amount of overlap.
A nation of procrastinators came up that we do our taxes. The vast majority of people do their taxes that last week, heading right up to April 15th. Or you get a spurt like at February 1st for those who know they're going to get some money back. And then you got everybody else that don't know or know they have to pay. And so they'll wait till the last minute. I don't mind. But hopefully we'll catch a lot of people here in advance of them having to do their taxes. And they will see at the very end the Nature and Wildlife Fund. What are the donation options? It begins at $10, $25, and like $50 maybe, but there's an other category. So you can contribute as much as you're comfortable with contributing. It can be an odd amount. Again, anything you want to donate to that fund can be turned into matching funds and increase those, but I believe the minimum is 10. The rule is you have to first be getting a refund to contribute to the fund. You can't incur further liability. So first you have to get a refund. Now, if you don't get a refund, is there still a way to contribute to the fund? Could they just send you a check?
Both agencies have a friends group. There's a friend of Kentucky Nature Preserves for our agency, and then there's the Fish and Wildlife Foundation for State Fish and Wildlife. Both of our agencies do receive support from the Nature's Finest license plate funding as well that goes towards some of the things that we do. So there's other ways besides the tax checkoff where an average person can help out. The way we file our taxes has changed over the years. There was a time where we just sat down with a piece of paper and filled out the form, or we went to a tax preparer's office. The graph I have here, digital tax preparation to the TurboTax, Tax Act, that sort of thing. 34%, so about a third, more than a third of the people will sit down and do them on computer, do them online, computer program. About another third, a little shy of that, have a tax accountant. Or how do you do yours? I have an accountant in Lexington that I've used for about 13 to 14 years now. There you go. And Zeb, do you do yours online or? The same with me. We have a tax preparer.
I have a tax preparer too, but it makes me wonder, and I asked this question on Facebook, if you're preparing your taxes online and you get to the end of it, nobody wants to be doing their taxes anyway, and there's another rule of thumb out there, I want as much money back as I possibly can get. If I go into it with that in mind, I want it easy, and I don't want anything that can take money away from me, like these tax checkoffs, for heaven's sakes. So I'm wondering if when you get to the part where, yes, you've established you're getting a refund, and then it would come up, you have the option now of contributing to one or all of these tax checkoffs. Have you seen or heard that part of the software is what I'll call a must-populate field, or you can just skip right over it, or do you have to give some attention to it to at least know that it's there?
My understanding from folks is that it varies, and it might not even be on all of them. I'm not sure. Since it's an official state document, I'm sure it has to be on there, but I do feel like probably some packages it's more prominent than others.
I had a response that said TurboTax did have it on there. I've not personally sat down to the computer and looked at it. I don't know if it's something you have to put in the number 0 or whatever amount you would want, or if you would be able to just fly right past it and get done and sign it and wait for your refund. But that said, you go to a tax preparer, guess what? When you're sitting in there, they've got somebody else in the waiting room that wants to get in there too. And the more taxes they can prepare for individuals, the more money that tax preparer is going to make, and the more money you're going to make if you don't give to funds like ours. So I'm wondering, and when you go to your tax preparers, do they say, okay, you have a refund coming, you have the option of contributing? Do they say that to you?
No, they don't. I usually offer that I'd like to contribute.
You have to tell them up front. That's my experience as well. You have to take the initiative to tell them.
You beat them to the punch.
Right.
I do the same thing, but my tax preparer knows after all these years that this guy wants to give to this fund, and so she automatically brings it up. But I'm wondering if that's the case. Maybe that would be a good thing to do. Listen, if you go to a tax preparer, remind them that, or if they don't ask you, I wish there were a way that they could take that extra 1 minute and go over what these tax donations support, but then that's time, and time is money.
You know, I never thought about it till right now, Charlie. It would be nice if we knew some conservation-minded tax folks that would just put that on their form letter they send to their clients. It just reminded them that not just our fund, but all these funds exist. And I doubt that many tax preparers that probably doesn't occur to them for the reason that you named. But I'm sure there's some conservation-oriented folks out there that might think about doing that.
Talk about some of the showcase things that this fund has been able to do over the last 25, 30, 40 years.
From the Nature Preserves Commission perspective, if as simple as going hiking at Blanton Forest in Harlan County, or the Tom Dorman Nature Preserve in Garrett County, or any of the places that we manage for hiking, those trails wouldn't be there. Certainly not in the shape that they're in without this fund. I mean, it's been very important. And from the other side of it, we have several federally listed endangered species where this fund has helped to manage their populations, including a couple that have been recently delisted. The white-haired goldenrod is a plant that is only found in the Red River Gorge area and was recently delisted. And so it's no longer on the endangered species list. Just happened in 2016, and this fund went towards some of the management work that got that delisted. So it's done some pretty big things, $10 at a time. You have some property that looks to me like it would have at the time Daniel Boone was here, huge trees that you just wouldn't expect to see these virgin forests in eastern Kentucky. Talk about one or two of these groves. Well, I mentioned Blanton Forest. It's our largest old-growth forest in the state of Kentucky, open to the public in Harlan County, which is a trail system there. Lily Cornett Woods is only by appointment only. It's a conservation easement held by the Heritage Land Conservation Fund, owned by Eastern Kentucky University, and it's been a long-term research area for many years in Letcher County. Martins Fork, Wild River area in Harlan County is another one that is a great place to go hiking, and it kind of ties in with, and Shalala Creek and Cumberland Gap National Park are all kind of tied in together. Stone Mountain is another one that's both a nature preserve and a wildlife management area that's in Harlan County, which is pretty impressive. We have a lot of ones down in the Pine Mountain area along those lines.
Is the Laterno Woods property, is that under your umbrella?
It is a Heritage Land Conservation Fund property that was purchased for State Fish and Wildlife, and it is a WMA, I believe, a unit of O'Bine Creek.
Yeah, it's down in western Kentucky.
It is owned by State Fish and Wildlife. A lot of these properties are multi-agency projects in one way or another, but really all of them are.
You've been mentioning state nature preserves and natural areas, and to me, maybe they're the same thing, but they're not, are they? How many of these do you have, and what's the difference between the two?
We have 62 properties that are in the state nature preserve system. The ones that are called state nature preserves are a legal designation that we call dedicated. That basically means they are the best quality example of that habitat, and nobody can mess with it. Can't tear it up. A state natural area is very similar, but they are generally managed in cooperation with State Fish and Wildlife, the Wild Rivers Program, another agency, and hunting is allowed on those. They're managed a little bit differently, but they're also very high quality. The Wild Rivers Program, which is under us as well now, is our forested, watershed protected forests. They're also open to hunting, so their management is slightly different.
Places, by and large, for public enjoyment and education. The topic is the Nature and Wildlife Fund tax checkoff, but the work is as big as all outdoors, and one of the biggest tasks is not just getting threatened and endangered species out of trouble, but keeping what's common. Details in our next half hour, plus our fishing report is standing by. My name is Charlie Baglan. Stay with us. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Back into our second half hour on Kentucky Afield Radio. We are on a new station this week in Madison, Indiana, serving Madison and Carrollton, Trimble County, Kentucky. It's great to be on WXGO and WORX in Madison, serving my hometown and where I got my start way back in 1981. It really is great to be back, and we're glad you picked up the show. And if you are in Indiana or one of our surrounding states, check your tax form as well. You may have a nature and wildlife type contribution option with your income tax form. But they're worth checking out. It is time now for our fishing report.
This is Jeff Crosby with the Central Fishing Report. It's that time of year to do those last-minute odds and ends of maintenance to your fishing equipment because another fishing season will soon be upon us. You can expect to find a few sauger below many of our locks and dams on the Ohio and Kentucky rivers. Live minnows or jigs, spoons, or crankbaits can be used to catch a few of these fish. Always be aware of any dangerous water conditions that can occur in these areas. It's also a great time of year to catch a few trout stocked in Hickman Creek, in Veterans Park in Lexington, Barrington Lake tailwaters, and ponds and lakes that are part of the Department's Fishing and Neighborhoods Program or FINS program. Crappie are still being caught at many of our area lakes, such as Taylorsville, Harrington. So grab a pole and enjoy some great winter fishing, and always wear your life jacket.
Hi, this is Kevin Fry with your Eastern Area Fisheries Report. Recent trout stockings on February 9th has been offering good fishing at Paintsville Lake and at Milo Lake in Martin County. Bank and boat anglers doing well in areas around State Park, Island, Marina, and Dam at Paintsville. Crappie anglers doing well at most all area lakes. Most fish at around 3-foot depth unless water is real clear. Although recently pulled down for repair work, anglers are still catching some large crappie at Fish Trap from 12 to 15 inches. Carr Creek and Buckhorn Lake also producing good-sized crappie. Some walleye and largemouth bass and catches from about 4.5-foot depth and around edges of brush or deadfall trees at Carr Creek Lake.
Hi, this is Eric Cummins with your Southwest Kentucky Fishing Report. Barren River Lake is at winter pool. Bass are being caught on jerkbaits, jigs, and lipless crankbaits. Areas that are good are windswept points, sunny banks, and then flat and channel transition areas. Crappie also being caught off channel drops near structure or wood with minnows and jigs. At Green River Lake, bass likewise are being caught with jerkbaits, jigs, slow-rolled spinnerbaits, The crappie have been best on deeper brush and structure. Barren tailwater, there are good numbers of hybrids and catfish. Target the slack water areas, current breaks. Green River tailwater, good numbers of walleye and white bass. As always, good luck and good fishing. Be sure your life jacket's got your back.
Hunting elk in Kentucky is a dream come true for many, and I want to add my name to that list.
And I want to add mine.
If you want to add yours,
the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife website is Elk Central. The Pick 4 option lets you put your name in the hat for cow, bull, archery, or firearm.
Plus youth tags.
The deadline is midnight, April 30th.
This could be my year.
And it could be yours.
Register for incredible Kentucky elk hunting at fw.ky.gov. Dear Mom, thank you for all the times you told me to go outside. Putting me on trails put me on the right path.
If you wrote Mother Nature a letter, what would you say?
That's easy.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
You're amazing.
And so are you. If your license plate at home or at work says Nature's Finest, you've helped protect nearly 100,000 wilderness acres across our state for all to enjoy.
And we're not done yet.
Explore more at heritageland.ky.gov.
We're back on Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. We're into our second half hour. The younger you are, the more inclined you are to file your taxes by way of the computer with a software program. The older you are, the more inclined you are to use a tax accountant. Those are the two biggies. The brick-and-mortar stores you see advertised on TV, or maybe having your friend do it, or filling it out with the old paper forms, those are a drop in the bucket compared to software and a tax accountant. Where do you fit into that matrix? We're talking today about contribution options that you see at the end of your Kentucky individual income tax form. They are called tax checkoffs. Nature and Wildlife Fund, Special Olympics, breast cancer research. Seems like there's about 8 or so options in all. Today, Zeb Weese, the Executive Director of the Kentucky State Nature Preserves Commission, and his agency shares in the receipts from this fund, along with the Kentucky Wildlife Diversity Program, coordinated by Sunni Carr through the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And Sunni, this program helps all of the animals that we don't hunt or we don't fish for. How many is that?
We have debated that number many times in terms of, do we include the migrants, the things that stop over, or are these just residents, and do we include insects? And the number just goes very high very quickly. We've got a couple hundred species of birds, and then you throw in mammals, and we've got crayfish and fish species, and the list goes on and on and on, and it truly is hundreds and hundreds of species. And yeah, it's a tall order. It's a little intimidating, but it keeps you coming back in with plenty in front of you to do each day. And in a state like Kentucky, where you go from river lowlands in the west and you move through the knobs areas and you move through these plateaus where we did have these grasslands, and you move up into knobs and into eastern Kentucky with the Appalachian Mountains, we have so much richness across our landscape. We have so much to be proud of in the state. And one of the things, within my career I would love to be able to do is to really impress upon our citizens that, this is theirs. They have so much to be proud of. And we have things that occur in the state that occur nowhere else in the world. And some of our river systems, the Green River, these are some of the top river systems in the world in terms of species richness. And I'm not sure that our citizens sometimes realize how lucky they are to have all these things here. And so, yeah, it's a big responsibility, but it's fun.
I think there's probably plenty of kids that are interested in nature and the outdoors that know more about Brazil's rainforest than know about what's in their own county, much less the rare places in Kentucky. To some extent, it's what's available easily for teachers to use for educational purposes. And I will plug something we've worked on for a while is through KET. You can get on KET's website, Kentucky Educational Television, and they have a whole series on biodiversity of Kentucky, educational materials, videos, lesson plans, the whole 9 yards that we all help develop with them. So that's something that any teacher, homeschool, anybody can download that information and learn a little bit about what we have here in Kentucky.
Within your shop, the Kentucky Wildlife Diversity Program, Sunni, talk about the individual areas such as John McGregor and bats. And
we can start with John. A lot of folks recognize him. Anytime he's not on one of the call-in shows, they say, "Where's the guy with the gray hair and the mutton chops?" Everybody loves John McGregor.
Looks like Isaac Asimov.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. John is what we call our herpetologist, meaning that he works with both reptiles and amphibians. And John, we are very lucky to have him. He's truly a gem. He's been working longer than I've been alive, and he's a wealth of information in terms of natural history for our state. John does work all over the state, and even within his career, he spent his whole career here in Kentucky. There are still things that he discovers each year that he didn't know. And he looks at amphibians like frogs and salamanders and things like that, and reptiles and turtles. And he keeps up with where they are and how they're doing. We have a lot of emerging disease issues, and he's keeping a handle on that as well. We do a lot of work with birds. And within the department, a lot of people associate waterfowl and birds together. And we don't do much of that in our shop. But what we do is we work with neotropical migrants, meaning birds that travel back and forth across the continents to Central or South America, to North America, sometimes into Canada. We do a lot of survey and assessment work. We do very specific work when we see that there are species groups in trouble and try to identify what the threats are, and then work with those and reduce those threats. We do, like you mentioned, with bats. We have a new employee in, Zach Couch, and he's working with helping us keep a handle on our bats in the state, and that's both in the summer when they're out in the woods and in the fields, and also during the winter when they're in their hibernacula. We go in and we do counts and do health assessments at that point.
What bats are there in Kentucky?
We have on record 13 different species, but the primary ones that folks are most familiar with, you have the listed bats, you have the Indiana bat, the gray bat, the Virginia big-eared bat, and then the recent listing of the northern long-eared bat. We also have some that used to be extremely common in Kentucky, but their populations have plummeted as a result of white nose syndrome. And our counts this year, we've had species that are, they've declined as much as 90%, which is really sad. Little brown bats, the eastern pipistrelle, or tricolored bat now. We also have southeastern bats and evening bats. So we have a whole variety of bats. We have red bats. They like to hang out in leaf litter. Some use trees, some use leaf litter, some use caves. So they're all over the landscape.
You say they're down by 90%. A lot of people would be out there jumping for joy because they don't know enough about bats. What is it that they do?
All animals in a system, they have a role that they play. It may be, the way I like to frame it up when I'm talking to school groups is we have daytime insect eaters and nighttime insect eaters. And in the daytime, you've got birds and some different animals that are out eating insects during the day. They help with control of those so they don't get out of balance and cause problems. At night, you have bats that are eating moths and other things. They can be a great pest control for farmers. And so they fill an important role. They eat a lot of insects that could cause damage to forest lands. Forest products industry is interested in healthy bat populations. So they have a very important role.
And if we didn't have the bats, what's the consequence, at least for agriculture?
Nationally, there was a study done probably about 5 years ago now, and it was over $1 billion is what the estimated impact was in a negative way to farmers due to increased pest populations as a result of bat populations declining. They're not there to eat the insects to help control that damage component. So that's pretty significant in the pocket.
When people think of bats or not liking bats, a lot of times they're thinking of the ones that are in their attic. They have to spend money to exclude and get rid of. For the most part, the bats that are rare are cave-dwelling or forest bats, involve forest management. They aren't the same bats. So the ones that we are spending our time working on, habitat improvement, things like that, probably not the same ones that are in your house. They're different species, and it's kind of like snakes. There's a lot of different ones we have in Kentucky, and they all have different niches, different habitat types. You find them in different places in the state, so they're not all the same.
One of the things that we're really proud of on the aquatic side is the Center for Mollusk Conservation, and that's with Dr. Monty McGregor and staff there.
I want to ask you if that was in your shop or maybe more in the Division of Fisheries. So you got the mollusk conservation.
We work with freshwater mollusk recovery and conservation work there, and we've had a really fantastic year. This is, again, one of those opportunities where if someone gives to the tax checkoff fund, those monies, we are constantly needing matching funds. We've come a long way in the science. We've had people from Brazil and China and all over the world come in to shadow with us and learn how we've been able to adapt and figure out these techniques to raise animals in the lab. Sometimes we don't know the host fish, which is required for the life cycle. It's pretty impressive when you can take business folks in or administrators and walk them up to some tanks and facilities, and you can put some animals in their hand and tell them you're holding more in your hand right now than exists in the wild. And that makes an impression. They realize that you can turn the corner, you can reach recovery, we can make a difference. Some of our waterways and some of the threats and pressures that made these animals become rare have been rectified or improved upon, and so we can go out and actually put these animals back out into the waterways. They help clean out bad bacteria like E. coli and things that people are concerned about when they want to swim in a waterway with their kids. They're thinking, is this water clean or not? The more mussels you have within that system, the better that water quality is going to be, because they filter out a lot of that bad stuff. If you love the smallmouth bass fish, you want to get in a good stream with good mussel populations.
And it's more like a clamshell. But
That's right.
When you say mussel, freshwater clams.
That's exactly
correct?
Right, yes.
As far as Kentucky is concerned, I want to point maybe to the Licking and Green Rivers. Do we have, like, half of the world's known population, or is it less than that? Do you know what that number might be?
I don't know the exact number on those, but I can tell you, when you're talking 20-plus endangered species within a system easily. We have beds within the Green and in the Licking you can go into, and there can be 20 listed mussel species with an A mussel bed, the size of your room here, which isn't that large, and it's extremely impressive. If you go down to places like the Big South Fork, there's just a handful of streams in some areas in southeastern Kentucky that we feel pretty confident we know most of the individuals that are still left in the wild. They're that few. Some of these are really, the clock is ticking, and we think about smaller rivers, but even our big rivers, the Ohio River, the Mississippi, the Tennessee, the larger ends of the Cumberland, there's a lot of species out there that there's not a whole lot left. And we've talked about a lot of rare stuff, but I think something that I've seen change in my career, you guys have mentioned, schools and education and talking about all the importance of the rare stuff, but I think that something we let slip by quietly is the importance of all the common stuff. And what was very common here 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that's the stuff that we're worried about now. Eastern meadowlarks, they used to be on every fence and in every field and pasture, and those are becoming more and more uncommon. Folks don't realize sometimes when things do slip away quietly, and all of a sudden they go, why is the monarch butterfly? Everybody's seen monarchs. Well, have you seen one lately? And if you did, how many? And compare that to what you saw when you were young. Within my career alone, we've seen very, very large-scale changes of how we use our land and our population growth and our urban growth, and none of those things are wrong. Part of our job is to keep common things common, and that's getting increasingly harder to do.
We'll be back to wrap it up when we return. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Kentucky Afield Radio. My name is Charlie Baglan. We're back with our final few minutes on the Nature and Wildlife Fund. It's a charity of sorts you never hear about because it only shows up on your Kentucky individual income tax form. It's not a black hole somewhere in Frankfurt that you give to and then you never see the results of. I will stake my reputation on it. The bald eagle work that happened some years ago for this endangered species to get them off of the endangered species list, that's just one example of what these funds have done. Zeb Weese, comment.
I think there's kind of a misconception that species on the endangered species list, it's hands off, they're going away, nobody move, nobody look at them.
They're contagious.
Yeah. If something goes on that endangered species list, our job is to get them off. We don't want them on the list. And it's hard to get things off the list. You got a lot of hoops to jump through and assessing populations and making sure they're back to being stable. But it's good if folks realize that when something's endangered, it's not too late. That's the point of calling them that.
I want to talk about Dr. Monty McGregor, who's in charge of the mollusk conservation and the mussel program. I can't remember how many years ago it was. He was trying to find ways to propagate these creatures. Monty would sit down and you both have seen this, he'll sit down, he'll sit out on the edge of his seat, and he'll lean forward, and he talks with such enthusiasm. And I had written a magazine article for Kentucky Afield magazine. I described it as, with the same enthusiasm as a UK fan would describe a Duke loss.
I'm not sure that's enthusiasm.
But he absolutely loves his work. And talking about endangered, threatened, extinction, was it the ring pink mussel down on the Green River that we thought was lost, was gone forever? He found one.
Yes.
And it's still alive. Now he's trying to figure a way to reproduce it. Any luck on that?
No, unfortunately, we have, since that time, since he found the first one. The good news is we have found a couple more individuals, and, this is over a 15-year period now. They're very old, and they're not showing any signs of being in a reproductive condition. That's not encouraging, but with a dam failure and some things going on in the Green River, we are hopeful that this summer we're going to be able to do some survey work and investigate some areas within the Green River that we've never been able to have access to before, and we're hopeful that we can find some that we can work with in the lab and maybe use some of our non-traditional methods to propagate those animals with rabbit serum or other products.
So we've been talking now for close to an hour about the Nature and Wildlife Fund, a contribution option on your state individual income tax for here in Kentucky. What other options are there for them to contribute to the wild world we live in and make a positive impact? Buy a fishing license, buy a hunting license?
I think probably the easiest one, as I mentioned, is the Kentucky Nature's Finest license plates. So it's $10 when you renew your tags on your car every year. That goes towards the Kentucky Heritage Land Conservation Fund, which funds habitat management for the kind of things that Sunni works in and I work.
What's down the road? What do you see in the next 10 years for the Department of Fish and Wildlife Diversity Program? What do you see, Zeb, for nature preserves? Who wants to go first?
Looking down the road, Charlie, I see a lot of opportunity for citizen engagement and interest in what we do, because a lot of what we do in their world, I think, been kind of, quote, out there and very landscape-oriented, and that's still going to be the case. But I think a lot of things are moving more to people's backyards. Again, when I brought up the comment about part of our job is to keep common things common, there's a lot of touches that folks feel like, well, that, quote, wildlife management or that kind of stuff is for out there. Well, out there has now become in here. And so kind of changing some mindsets, reaching out, letting folks know that they have a lot to contribute where they live. And we have some big scary stuff on the horizon. There are a lot of disease issues. There's a lot of different types of fungal diseases that seem to be impacting different types of wildlife that we haven't seen before, and we're not sure what's going on. Why are their immune systems being suppressed? Why are they susceptible to these? And those have some bigger picture implications. The days of just, quote, wildlife management going in and changing the way we mow and manage a piece of property, that's still extremely important and is core to what we do. But in the world that I work in, there's a lot of other contributing factors that we have to kind of sort through, and we have very limited staff and resources. But I always like to look at it as the conservation clock is ticking. Some of what we do, we have a lot of time to figure it out, and some things that we do, we don't have much time at all, and that clock tends to be speeding up. So every dollar that citizens contribute, I can assure you, is being managed carefully, and it's much appreciated, and it goes a long way in helping protect the Commonwealth's resources.
Zeb, you telling time by that same clock, are you?
Pretty much. Again, some of the same things that Sunni was mentioning. Hemlock woolly adelgid control, which is an insect that's wiping out our hemlock coves, which affects water quality, affects habitat for some of our rare plants and fish and crustaceans, a lot of the same stuff. But kind of separate from that, as far as what we're going to be doing over the next few years, partly because I have a little boy turning 6 this week and another one who's 4, I spent a lot more time thinking about getting people out on our natural areas and people making them more accessible. A lot about that. And so I think over the next few years, you're going to see a greater emphasis on making them accessible to folks, letting people know where they are, how to get there. With the Wild Rivers program, we want to figure out a way to get more folks out there enjoying paddling, enjoying canoeing. Not only because it's fun, but because, we all know about the importance of being active and health related, that just being outside, it benefits all of us. as part of that, from the Nature Preserves Commission standpoint, I think over the next year or so, this is kind of boring stuff, but I think it'll be cool for all the people that are in love with their cell phones, as you're going to see more accessible information on our website, letting people know what rare species are out there and where they are, and again, what natural areas open to hiking, open to recreational activities, bird watching, things like that. We're going to just place more emphasis on getting information out there and letting people know what their tax check off and what their license plates have paid for over the years and how they can enjoy them.
I admire you, too, for what you've done for many years and what you're looking at going into the future. You're two of my favorite people, so thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having us, Charlie.
Thanks a lot, Charlie.
The Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Agency and the State Nature Preserves Commission. If you haven't done your taxes yet, when you do them, ask your tax preparer or make sure you take a look for at the very end, if you're going to get a refund, what these tax checkoffs are all about. Read the description. There might be one or two or three that you'd like to support. We are out of time. This is Charlie Baglan inviting you to join us in a week, and we'll go inside outdoors again here on Kentucky Afield Radio.